think before starting revising, the first thing to consider is definitely planning your revision. This is important because revising can be very difficult and actually quite stressful if you don't give yourself enough time to do it. So it's important to consider how much time you have to revise, and also what the extent of the content you have to cover is. So before any exam period, you might do this, for example, at Easter or at Christmas, before your A-Levels or GCSEs. It's important to consider your exam timetables. When are your exams? What exam subjects need priority? That's more of a personal thing. So which subjects do you feel need more revision? And how many hours of revision you want to do each day. I know for GCSE, it's very common, or a common recommendation is around 6 hours a day. I'd say for me, that worked about right. And for A-level, that might need a little bit more. Obviously, if you're still at school, I wouldn't recommend doing 6 hours of work on top of your schoolwork. That would be quite a lot. But if you've had a full day of school, maybe 1 to 2 hours work after that, and then 6 hours on a day where you're not at school, is generally quite a good rule of thumb. So that's what I'd recommend. For 11 plus, obviously it's slightly different. 6 hours is going to be a lot of work for that. So generally quite a bit less, but that's an individual thing. So if you feel like it's too much and you're struggling a bit, then you can always reduce that. And if you feel like you're not getting there enough, then sometimes it gets to that point where you have to put in a bit more work if you're getting near to the exams, but it should all pay off in the end. So considering these things, the first thing to do is always to build a revision timetable. If I can get there. Okay, revision timetable. One like this is really good. So just sort of planning out what sections of your day you're going to work. And I think the most important thing to look at from this timetable is actually what the breaks are. For me, I've always found it very difficult to revise and take breaks if I don't leave that room. So if I'm revising in a study or my bedroom, for example, or even like a library or at school, I would say if you're revising for a long period of time, it's always good to get out of that room for a bit, especially in between your revision periods. Maybe talk to some friends, talk to your parents, your family, do some exercise if that's what you want to do, have a snack, have a drink. I found it works much better for my not only my motivation and how I'm feeling throughout the day, but also my ability to recall things if I do that. Staying in the same room and being on my phone, for example, or watching Netflix, although it's very tempting, I definitely have done it, I've found that that's not so useful. So if you're looking to be really productive, I'd say try and get outside a little bit, get out of your room, and make sure you maximize your breaks. Okay, so the next thing to think about after you've got a revision timetable and you plan some of your revision is actually your motivation. And this is something that I know is difficult for a lot of people. It was definitely difficult for me at some periods in school because at the end of the day, exams in school, it's not always easy. And it's sometimes for an end goal, which is difficult to visualize at the start. What was that, sorry?
No, nothing.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, no worries. Yeah, so motivation for revision is something that actually does need some thought. And a massive thing that I found really helped me was focusing on short-term goals. And I know when you start revising, your goal is obviously going to be to do well in an exam or to achieve a certain grade, to get to the point you want to get to. However, those kind of things can seem very far away. So at the start, it's always important to break down your days and your revision periods into smaller goals, smaller achievements. Even if it's just achieving a certain amount of questions by the end of a time limit, or understanding a certain topic in a day, achieving those goals really gives you that feeling of satisfaction that you need to keep going throughout a long period of revision. It's very difficult to find the willpower every day to focus on a final goal if it's far away. So make sure you break your goals up into a lot of short-term achievements. Another thing with motivation is keeping your days varied. it's very easy to think, okay, I have a maths exam in 3 weeks. Today, I'm going to spend 6 hours doing maths, which might be necessary if you're doing some kind of cramming towards your exam period. But if you've got the time, you're revising properly, keeping your days varied is really important, because if you've got a subject that you don't like so much, let's say you really enjoy studying English, but you're not such a big fan of biology. In that case, I'd say try and combine your biology and your English. Don't spend a whole day doing biology, because that's going to be a really awful day. So try and vary it with subjects you do like. Just to give you an idea of what is sort of keep you motivated. Shutting out distractions are important. So having your phone all the time is, although it may make the revision seem more, I suppose, palatable, more easy to manage at first, it's a lot less productive, because you don't focus so well if you're on your phone every couple of minutes. And creating a routine is really important. So if you've got a revision timetable, try and stick to it. Try and do it for a period, a few weeks in a row. Get into the habit of it, because once something's a habit, once you do something regularly, it becomes a lot easier to then repeat what you're doing over and over again. And I suppose the final thing for this is being really positive about what you're trying to do and how your revision's going. I think when I was younger, I was always very hard on myself. I wouldn't give myself much slack when it came to if I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve in practice papers, or even just revision sessions, if I wasn't happy with what I'd done. But it's important that you think positively about actually what you have achieved, because sometimes that's difficult to see, but that is what keeps you motivated in the long run. And positive thinking is something that really helps you answer questions. Even if your knowledge is not necessarily better than someone who thinks positively, they might have a much better outlook on a question. Let's say it requires some kind of problem solving. If you've got confidence that you have revised hard and you know how to do a question, you will think much better about it than someone that has been very hard on themselves and thinks, okay, I don't think I can do this. They don't tend to focus as well, because immediately from the start you're thinking, okay, I can't do this. And the final thing, motivation, starting. I know maybe sounds fairly trivial and short, but you can build up revision in your head to be a massive thing. And at the end of the day, when you start doing it, it can actually be a lot easier than you'd expect. So I'd always recommend, even if you're going to do a 10-minute revision session, just start, because that really helps to avoid procrastination. A technique which is really helpful with starting revision is something called the Pomodoro technique. It's something that I used a lot last year in university, because it really helps to alleviate procrastination. So if you're someone that puts off work a lot, I'd find a lot of the time I'd do a block of revision and then maybe take a break that was slightly too large. This really helps manage things like that. Essentially what it is a 25-minute revision period followed by a 5-minute break, which you then repeat maybe 4 or 5 times, depending on what your schedule is. After those 5 times, you then take a longer break and then go back again into the 25 minutes and 5-minute breaks. Let's say you took a lunch break in the afternoon, for example. And that's really helpful to make sure you stay focused, because if you're someone that struggles maybe with focusing for long periods of time in school or in class, a 25-minute period, or even if you want to shorten it to a 20-minute period, is a fairly short period of time. So that allows you to focus as much as you can over that period of time. And it keeps you engaged, and it's fantastic for motivation. If you think, okay, I've got to work, I only have to do 25 minutes right now, then I can have a break. Sometimes it's difficult to think, okay, I'm going to do 2 hours. That's a big block of time, but 25 minutes is more manageable at the start. This is also customizable. It's important to note, 25 minutes or 20-minute time might be a lot more appropriate for some people than it is for others. And you might feel that you want to revise for longer periods than this. I always found that once I was in the flow and I was concentrated on my revision, it took me coming out of it again quite regularly was more difficult. So you could do, for example, a 1 hour block, a 1 hour and a half, a 2 hour block, followed by a slightly longer, I don't know, 15 or 20-minute break, if that suited you better. Okay, so now we've covered how to plan your revision, and how to stay motivated coming into your revision, and how to keep it going. So the next thing to look at is, I suppose, the obvious thing for the topic of the presentation: how do you actually revise? What are the best tips for memory recall? How can you best maximize your time when revising? And what's the best way to stay motivated without being too stressed out around your exams? So I'd say the most important thing, the one rule that really comes above all others with revision, is actually making sure you're doing active revision. It's very easy, and it's something I do all the time, and I'm guilty of doing this year a lot as well, is sitting down and reading some notes or copying out something from a textbook word for word. This revision, although it does something, is really, really unproductive because it takes a long time, and it's you don't think about what you're reading or writing, and that is really not good for your long-term memory. It's not good for your memory recall, and also it's not good for your problem solving. If you've got a question where you need to recall 3 or 4 different things, maybe you're writing an essay in English, and you need to think about the themes behind a quote, or you're doing a maths question and you have 3 or 4 different methods that you think you might be able to use that you want to sort of work out how to put together. This is a fantastic ensuring that you revise actively and make sure that those kind of things are easy for you. And it's essentially just any form of revision that requires you consciously thinking about what topic you're doing. So really anything except copying things down, but you could apply it to anything as long as you're actively thinking and understanding the work you're doing. So that's a really good check to do when you're revising. If you're doing a bit of work, okay, am I right now really thinking about the work I'm doing? Have I understood what I've just done? And if someone asks me a question, maybe a few different examples, could I answer them at least to a certain degree if you're just starting revising? So the next few techniques will cover what have been for me, and I think for some of my friends as we've got older, the best techniques for active revision. So let's get into those quickly. Okay, so this is probably my favorite one, and that might bring a few people not to a sense of dread, but it may not be initially the most appealing type of revision. And for me, that's writing revision notes. It's really important to point out here that doesn't mean writing pages and pages of notes, copying out textbooks and things like that. What I'd say this means is notating key points, definitions, topics or parts of topics that you really hadn't quite grasped when you first read the notes or you first looked at your syllabus. Just things that you absolutely need to remember, and maybe not even with revision notes writing them once, possibly writing them 5, 6, 7 times over and over. I found that was especially useful with languages. When I was doing French in school, writing, I feel like with languages the worst thing is always doing the grammar and the verb endings. So writing out the endings I found was really, really helpful over and over again. So I would definitely recommend that if you're looking for a technique in sort of languages, and even definitions in, I'm not sure, a subject like geography maybe, you can use that for as well. Another really useful thing is flashcards and mind maps. So these work really, really well if you're someone that's a bit more creative. If you like using colors a bit more in your revision and you learn a bit more visually, then these are really important because these can allow you to not only understand the topic, but also sort of see it in your mind, connect it together, which I think can help a lot. I would say with flashcards and mind maps, one thing to be really careful is not to spend a lot of time making them too pretty. I think it's very tempting to develop a mind map and then draw on it loads and make it look really nice, loads of different fonts, things like that. Although those things can be helpful, they tend to be more unproductive with revision. So if you want to maximize your time, I would recommend make a mind map or make a flashcard, but while you're doing it, make sure that you know, make sure you've got in your head exactly what you're gaining from making that flashcard. One thing that I found flashcards were actually really helpful with is topic summaries. So what I would do with what I did for my GCSE exams is I bought a pack of maybe 50 to 100 flashcards. And on one side, I would write some condensed notes, the key points and definitions that I'd got I didn't quite understand from a topic before. After this, I would, on the back, then try and write a summary of the topic. Everything from the card that I thought I remembered, maybe even a bit extra, anything that I could remember around the topic. I then compare what I had on both sides of the card, and if what I've written on the back was different to what was on the front, or if the actual revision notes were significantly different to what I thought they were, then I knew that they needed more attention. And that's something that's actually quite similar to also testing yourself, which is really important, but we'll come on to that, I think, in the next slide. So the next technique, and I'd say what probably is far and away the most important technique, is testing yourself regularly. Even before you start doing any work, testing yourself can be really helpful. It's fantastic for information recall, and it gives you the best idea of what's going to come up in the exams. So whether you're rising for an A-level or an 11 plus exam, realistically, what you're trying to answer is questions on a paper. The information you're learning is helping you when you apply it to that exam situation. So I would say make sure that you test past exam papers regularly, and things that you don't know in those exam papers or questions that you don't quite understand, make sure you go over them and learn those topics. I found another really good way to practice past questions or test yourself was something that I could do actively in school. So when I was in school, I felt like this worked especially well in maths, but you could apply it to any other subject. So if there was a question that I'd done in a lesson that I hadn't got right, or I knew that I didn't quite understand properly, I'd always put a star next to it in my book, or like a sort of scribbly sort of asterisk thing. It never looked particularly pretty, but it meant that when I revised for my tests, or when I took a practice paper myself, before I'd go back through my book, and it was really obvious all of the topics that I needed to go over, all of the questions that I hadn't quite understood, and then I could read over them again or do them again. Essentially, just whatever was necessary to fully understand that question before going on to the actual topic or going on to an actual past paper. And I know, obviously, a key thing, again, with sort of joining back to what we said about the start with keeping motivated, is varying up how you work. And testing yourself and doing practice papers is really effective, but it might not always be the most exciting way of revising. And so, in a way to change it up, working with your friends occasionally and testing yourself, especially if you're both taking the same exams, or if you have a friend who is happy to read a few of the flashcards that you've made to you so you can test your definitions and keywords. Working with friends is really, really useful because it makes things a bit more fun, and also it forces your brain to learn things in a different environment and take things on in a different way, which always helps. Having different sort of ways to memorize things and different ways and places to learn things, that's what builds up long-term memory rather than just sort of short-term cramming of things. Okay, so the final revision technique that I'm going to talk about is something that I did quite regularly in my GCSEs and A-Levels, and I found it was super helpful, especially really close to exam times. So it's a thing called blurting, which might sound a bit weird. I think as a concept, it definitely sounds like something's like, oh, I don't know if that would work, but actually it's very, very helpful. So what I do is I take a topic or this will work fantastically with like a biology or a chemistry question where, let's say you have a 4-mark question and you need 4 specific points to answer the question. Sometimes in the mark schemes, you'll get questions where they have 6 or 7 points, or maybe they only have 4, but you need to get all of them. So what I used to do was I take a question or a topic and as quickly as I could in my worst handwriting. I'd write down everything that I knew about the topic, regardless of whether I thought it was absolutely perfect to answer the question. I'd write down every single point that I could think of. Then I'd check with the mark scheme or compare it to the topic, and any gaps in my knowledge, I would then repeat. I'd go back, I'd learn those again. And yeah, as I was saying, it works really well with close to exam periods. If you're comparing it to past paper questions, for example, it's fantastic to find gaps in your knowledge or questions which you might not be so secure on. Before I talk about revision resources, which is the next slide, I think it's also important to mention not just staying motivated, but also making sure that you look out for how you're feeling during these exam periods. Exams can be a very stressful time for a lot of people, and there are a few things, although you can't make them completely stress-free, because at the end of the day, some of the exams you take are important, but there is a few ways you can help reduce the stress that you're going through. And a really big one is always talking to people. Your friends and family are really good for this. I found my friends were always really helpful, especially in a situation where they were taking a similar exam to me, because I think it's easy to isolate yourself when you're revising. You can think, oh, I've done this, I've done this sort of, all this revision by myself, but I don't understand this certain topic, or this has taken me a really long time. And it's very, very easy. I think even more recently in times of COVID, where we're not necessarily all in school with other people, it's very, very easy to think negatively about how you're doing and compare yourself to other people without realizing actually that a lot of people are in the same situation. So it's really important to look out for how you're feeling in your mental health during and around exams. Another thing I would say is very important is making sure you eat correctly and not necessarily get exercise, but get outside. I think there's a temptation when you're revising to work. Well, obviously there's temptation to work more, but to stay inside and to work consistently and think, okay, that's my day. I'm inside, I'm working. I can't go out. I can't do anything else. But actually going out and seeing friends, going for a walk, walking maybe a pet dog if you have one, things like that are really, really helpful, just to make sure that you stay sort of in a better frame of mind to do your exams, because exams are hard enough without having to go in there and thinking, I'm also struggling with, I'm nervous about them. Maybe I'm not so happy with the prep I've done. Trying to keep yourself in a good frame of mind is really important too. Okay, so as a slightly more subject specific and a last thing, I want to quickly cover some revision resources. So these are essentially a list of the resources that helped me the best when I was revising for my exams. I've always found actually that although all these resources are very, very helpful, especially in school, the best resource you have is your teachers, the people in school, because they're the people that teach the course year in, year out, but also they see what students do year in, year out, and they see what you do and they see the exam papers. So teachers often have a very good feel, not only for what's going to be on exams, but for what you need to do the most. So if you're ever looking for resources or specific questions, I would say always ask your teachers, or don't be afraid to ask them about things you've done outside of lesson as well. There's a book you have that you've done some questions from, maybe take a question in, and you can do that in with your teacher as well. But aside from that, past papers are really, really important. For GCSE and A-Level, I'm not so sure about the 11 plus exams, but I remember when I took them, you could definitely get hold of them. For GCSE and A-Level, they all have the same exam board. So you're looking for AQA, EdExcel, OCR, past papers, depending on what exam board your specific subject is with. I think for me, when I did my exams, they were all pretty well indexed, so you could find pretty much whatever you needed. They also release practice papers for each year. So not only do they have the past papers, they also have a practice paper for the year you're doing, which is really, really helpful. It's also important to note that occasionally syllabus changes with different exam boards. So if you're doing an old exam, make sure you check whether the style of questions is the same as a style you might get in the paper you're going to sit, because sometimes you can get different structures, different mark schemes, things like that. And it's really important to be practicing the same structures that you get that you're going to see in your exam. The next few are sort of companies that I think the books are really useful from. So CGP make fantastic books, all the way through from 11 plus to A-level. They have questions and also textbooks. I don't think you can go too far wrong with a lot of the CGP stuff, to be honest. It's a very helpful resource. Although I would always check some of the things in it with the past papers, because it's not necessarily perfectly correlated with what's going to be in your exam. So always make sure that the questions you're doing are exactly specific to the topic you want to learn. However, CGP books on the whole are really, really helpful. Another tool which I think is fantastic, especially at the start of your GCSEs coming into your exams, and really good for understanding things, is BBC Bitesize. BBC Bitesize has fantastic explanations of topics. Generally there for if you are quite new to a topic or if you're initially learning it, but it's super helpful, and I found it super helpful when there was something that I'd done a while back and I'd forgotten, I needed some grounding. BBC Bitesize was fantastic for explanations of this. More specifically, Just Maths is a great website for maths questions. If that's what you're looking for, I believe that goes from 11 plus to A-level. Definitely covers GCSE very comprehensively. But they have some fantastic questions, which, in my experience, mirrored very closely what you'll find in your actual exams. And the final thing is textbooks. So at school, you get a lot of textbooks. The teacher's not necessarily going to set you homework for all of the questions in the textbook, but there are a lot of questions out there to be done. So if you want question practice, if you need recap of topics, it's always a great place to look. Not to mention a similar thing to CGP books, just make sure that the questions you're doing are always focused on your syllabus exactly, because sometimes they're not perfectly matched with exam papers. So if you're doing that, just be careful that the questions you're doing are similar to those on exam papers. That's another thing that your teacher can really help you out with as well.